So Shashank, thank you for being back on the program. For the last episode, it's great to see you once again.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ayush. In the past, we've had some really interesting, fun conversations, and I'm glad to be back here. And glad to be in this, think of it as an interesting episode, since it's the last one I would understand before you close 2025. So happy to be part of that episode.
Yeah, likewise. I think you were also the last episode for 2024, so that's an interesting thing
There
as
you
well.
go.
It's a
Two
nice
years
step
in a
ahead.
row.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Um, One of the things that I want to start off with is towards the start of 2025, we had all of these perceptions and predictions for how the AI space would evolve, would grow, and possibly shrink, for example. Was there any specific prediction you remember that you were saying this is probably an inevitability? And did it happen or did it not happen? Just off the top of your mind.
Yeah, I think the part that I was probably mulling over this time of the year last year um, was really the emergence of more specialized intelligence, more reasoning models, right? Where we would start seeing just broadly applications of AI becoming more widespread because the technology would mature. Um, Now, it would be an understatement if I said that that hasn't happened in 2025. In fact, a lot of it has happened. Um, what I must confess, though, is that I was thinking that it would be a little more gradual, if you may, and I also suspected that the emergence of these better models, or more than better is kind of a loose defined term, but models that can do more things like think and reason and go through various kinds of different human type or human centric analysis would come through over gradual sort of changes by the same set of companies that had kind of laid the foundation in 2024, but of course kind of out competing each other a little bit. Um, that one I feel like was accelerated and was very asymmetric in 2025. It came from all corners. It came from all kinds of new players that weren't even around in 2024. So I think like that was definitely surprising in a good way. Um, the part that confirmed, like that, the part that I thought like I was betting my own company on and my own sort of thesis on, which became even more prominent, was the rise of open source. So my early thesis was, and this was even in the prior year in 2023, when nobody was thinking about open source being of consequence because the open source models weren't really as sophisticated back then. My experience from years of just enterprise technology and technology growth was that eventually, and maybe soon enough, not even eventually means like in a long period of time, but soon enough, open source is going to catch up and be as good as the best closed or proprietary technologies or alternatives. That was something that I thought would be true. And I think in 2025, we saw that come in with full force. We definitely have a ton of open source options, and some of them are probably the better options than even the closed options. So that I was excited about. It came through sooner than I thought it would. So it's fun. Yeah.
Um, just for the audience, can you say a little bit more about your business, the intersection you're involved in, and like what you're doing in the AI space?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I'm co-founder CEO of a company named Uno AI, and Uno is roughly about a little younger than a 4-year-old company, just about coming up on its, fourth sort of anniversary, if you may, since its existence. Um,
Happy
the
birthday.
companies, well, yeah, thank you. And for a startup, that means a lot because every year you become a different company effectively. Um, and then, really, if you think about our thesis was very simple. It was the intersection of two wide sort of movements that have become front and center today. One was how can we hyper automate a lot of the human centric tasks? So that was sort of the foundational idea. And the second one was how can we take that specialization in intelligence that may be possible to construct and build and take it to a verticalized solution that today is very human intensive. So that way, if we can automate away the human intensive tasks, and there is an industry that is very human intensive, well, that would benefit immensely from it, and we would see some very tangible, measurable outcomes. So that's basically what our company does, and our company specializes in the vertical of governance, risk, compliance, third-party risk management, business continuity, and related workflows, audit, et cetera, et cetera. And this segment, for anybody who's familiar with it, one way or the other, knows that it's very human intensive. It's very services driven. It's very advisory driven. Um, And the good news is that, over the last 2, 3 years, almost coming up in four, like I mentioned, we've really built a very formidable solution that has changed the game in very substantial ways. Not just trying to hyper automate what the humans were doing prior to what we brought to market, but also sort of allowing for newer possibilities or allowing for capabilities and feature sets that earlier in the sort of classic, I would say, traditional automation and combined with human endeavor was practically not possible. I mean, it was always possible, but practically not feasible. It was just too expensive or took too much time or was just too complex. That has become possible with Uno today. So that's what we do. And for completeness sake, we work, obviously, as I explained who we are, we work with a lot of large banks, healthcare companies. We work with a lot of advisory companies who we partner with. And we service a lot of the mid-market, but also the Fortune, 1,000, who are very excited to have this technology and, come to their advantage. That's who we are.
Yeah, it sounds exciting, and you were talking about how 2025 was a massive year for growth and for opportunity for Uno. So congratulations on that.
Thank
Do
you.
you see the same thing spilling into 2026, or do you see 2026 as a different kind of year, not just for Uno, but for the AI industry in general? We've heard a lot of talks just from the visionaries to the big tech companies to the small people to the skeptics. What is your perspective on where 2026 is going to take the AI industry?
Yeah, I think 2026, in my opinion, is going to be even more impactful than 2025, um, which by itself is, I think, quite a loaded statement. Because if you really look back in, sort of the modern, I'll call it generative AI history, not the past sort of, MLAI and where we have come today, but just the last few years. 2021 November is when ChatGPT kind of came around, and that's what made it more commonplace. So by 2022, um, January, February, I think many people had begun to get their hands on ChatGPT and the sort of Gen AI possibilities. And then we saw through 2022 and 2023 that technology kind of come together and become a little more meaningful. Because for the most part, although it was exciting to see something that resembled human-like behavior, um, it made too many errors, and it was not doing anything meaningful up until almost 2023 end, where you could use it for meaningful task completion, whatever that would be. Something even as simple as write an essay for you. It would do a lot of um, undesirable outcomes. Back then, it would not even make a coherent full essay for you. But as we walked into 2024, those things became commonplace. Now you could start using it for at least authoring and editing and things like those, right? And those were the first few use cases that started emerging 23 and 24. um, what we saw in 2025 was really I would say, growing up of the technology to become a serious contender for reasoning centric tasks, for tasks that involved contextual data, for tasks that involved thinking or so-called thinking, right, where you have to piece together different pieces of information, make decisions, weigh them against each other. Those kinds of outcomes became very possible in 2025. And we saw the manifestation of that in AI, especially in two or three areas that became front and center. One of which is, as the industry likes to call it, vibe coding, right? So we saw the emergence of, essentially AI assisted coding becoming from a fringe idea, an experimental idea, to a mainstream idea. In fact, so much so that if you really look back, and it's been very rapid. Last year this time, it was a concept that people were trying, and yes, there were co-pilots before that, and Cursor was kind of around, but nothing was meaningful, nothing was too big, right? And today, I think we're at a point where most people are questioning, will traditional programming be over soon? And will vibe programming or vibe coding be the way that we do programming from here on, right? And whether that'll happen or not is a different story. But I'm saying, like, we have come that far in 12 months, right? So that application has become very real, for better or for worse, with its own ups and downs and trade-offs. But it's become very real. Similarly, we see with content generation. And yes, there has been the so-called AI slop and a lot of sort of online content that is generated today with AI and annoying. But at the same time, I think one cannot deny that AI has seeped into every form of content generation. Sometimes authoring, sometimes editing, sometimes supplementing, sometimes for ideation, and sometimes for just overall artifact creation. But content generation has definitely been taken over in a big way by AI, one way or the other. Um, and then the third part is what I would call specialized applications. Um, and specialized applications could be the like that we built, in the sort of specialized vertical of GRC, but they could also be things around, finance, or things around, standard database management, or things that could deal with marketing and sales management, or pipeline, sort of curation, or things that could deal with other kinds of workflows like those. So that has certainly come through very quickly in 2025. It has really become very front and center. What I think is going to happen in 2026, and this is a big question, is that I think we'll see an acceleration of those. But also, I think what we'll see is we're going to see a little bit of plateauing on some of those as well. So this is where I might contradict myself, but I think that's the reality we're going to live with. Is we'll see faster innovation cycles, but we'll also see that compounded with some disillusionment, because eventually there's only so many cat pictures you can create, right? Or there's only so many of those AI slap content you can create. Um, and I think at some point in time, we might start questioning, okay, is it worth the money? Is it really worth our time and energy and effort to do some of these things that we are doing? And that would create the downward pressure and shake up the use cases, and shake up where we want to focus and double down. So I think there'll be a good, healthy combination of both. Models getting smarter, more AI applications being thought through, faster innovation cycles, more capabilities added onto the models. So that I think we'll definitely see. Also, a lot more open source this year than ever before. Um, but at the same time, I think we'll see this, you know, emergence of reality sort of shining a light on some of this and saying, sure, this is cool, but to what end? Right? Why are we wasting this money? Right? Or why are we even doing these things? What does it really get us? Right? It's cool, it's interesting, it's fun, but so what? So I think the two forces are probably, in my opinion, going to come together in 2026 and define what the AI space looks like eventually.
Absolutely. One of the interesting things about you is you're an AI CEO, so you're on the ground and you're interacting with, the large enterprises and also your company employees and also people that are not involved in the AI industry and also people that are skeptics of the AI industry. So you have kind of like your hands in all these different places. So just from like I guess the large enterprises, for example, obviously we're not going to ask personal or confidential questions, but what are conversations that are happening, in those boardrooms or in the C-suite that people would be surprised about when it comes to maybe AI integration or how they're looking at artificial intelligence for business, not just in 2026, but for the next handful of years.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and you're right. We do end up getting that front row seat in that, thanks to the kind of business that we are in, and thanks to the people that we sell to and work with and partner with. Um, well, first things first, I want to dispel a myth or a belief that seems to be very prevalent today, and that myth is that CEOs, largely not even CIOs, but CEOs across corporate America and globally, are in a rush and in a hurry to AI wash, as it's being called, which essentially they somehow bring in the AI so that we are also a cool AI powered company. Um, and then pushing their C-suite leaders to go and pursue AI initiatives or AI projects, and therefore sort of bring in that AI advantage as soon as possible. So this is a narrative that's sold quite a bit. Um, and now there is an element of truth to it. And the truth really is that, yes, there is money and budget and time and effort that is being allocated and put towards AI initiatives and AI projects across companies, and especially large, well-funded, powerful, winning companies. So there's no two ways on that. Um, However, I think the difference is that the narrative of it being sort of a top-down driven frantic effort to AI wash is probably only supplemented or only supported by these one-off cases that make news, right? So we heard of all these. I think there was a company that replaced its entire support team with AI bots.
In
I think
India,
that
yeah,
was
I
right.
remember
Somebody
that.
did that, and then they changed course 3 months or 4 months later, saying, "Oh, this is not working for us. We got to bring back the people." Um, we also heard stories where large, powerful public SaaS companies said, "Hey, we are getting rid of our entire teams, and then we will end up getting AI to do the work for them, and then sort of course correcting a little bit." And these made headlines, and these were taken as the broad brush approach to how corporates were thinking about AI. However, in my interaction, I think that's as far from the truth as it could get. What is really happening on the ground from these C-suite executives across banks, healthcare companies, technology companies, industrial powerhouses, retail, just all kinds of sectors. There is definitely curiosity, and there's a lot of funding and initiative to go learn and take advantage of AI. So that's definitely true. However, it's also matched quite evenly with skepticism because many of these companies, firstly, are way more answerable to their boards and regulators and the public and just the industry at large than most people would like to believe or would like to agree with. Right. So, for example, a healthcare company, as much as they would be dying to put all their healthcare data, churn through AI, there's a lot of hoops they need to go through before they would even want to do that. Forget they wanted to do that. Even if they wanted to do that, they have to make sure they have a ton of checks and balances, and they're able to comply with a whole bunch of different requirements before they can make that a reality. So there is that, sort of the checks and balances, if you may, or the skepticism. And then there is also the skepticism in terms of what's the risk or what's the loss that can happen in case these go wrong. Um, so having said that, there is, I think, in these companies, honestly, in the Fortune 2000 odd companies, there is a far more mature take at AI than one would like to agree with, or one would like to buy from the broader media narrative. What those companies are really doing is they have realized that AI is an important piece of the puzzle, and they have seen technologies like cloud and internet and mobile and whatever else has come before AI actually have a big impact on their business. So they are not ignoring it. They certainly want to get key initiatives, projects, AI driven or AI first or AI powered as they see appropriate. But at the same time, they are approaching it with a lot more maturity, with a lot more caution, with a lot more preparedness. And so what I do see is that from what in the beginning was enthusiasm for let's go hunt for AI use cases, it has transitioned into a tool, a technology, a methodology for them to drive greater productivity or unlock some new value, right? Or enter into a new business that may have been difficult in the past, or outcompete their competition. And so they are really, in some sense, going beyond the consumer grade excitement and questioning and making it real to say, well, what can AI really do for us, really? Where is it helpful, right? Which areas is it where it can really supplement us? Where can we see measurable, tangible, outcomes and benefits out of it? And then last but not the least, and this is where we end up getting a good audience with these kinds of companies, is they want a technology that does wonders, like everybody likes magic, but they want that technology to come in with the level of guarantee and maturity that at least the status quo provides. Forget better than that, but at least what the status quo provides, which in other words means there's a certain element of accuracy, there's a certain element of reliability, there's a certain element of um, you know um, checks and balances against bias, fairness, stuff like that, right? Which is sort of built into the current processes, workflow systems, which is a mix of automation and human-driven processes, right? And that's what keeps their business going year on year, and allows them to sort of operate in a mature manner. So they at least want that same status quo level of reliability in the system, which many times is difficult to achieve with new technology, and especially with a technology like AI. So they're definitely pushing the boundary on that. That's an area where we also lean in quite a bit, and that's why we also see some good match there or meeting of minds there, where we are saying, yes, we want to definitely take advantage of the technology, which is what they want to do. But at the same time, make sure we're not compromising on the basics. We're not compromising on things that we definitely need to make sure are, covered, and things that we absolutely have our eyes on.
One of the things that, especially my generation, but I think everybody is struggling with right now is how artificial intelligence is affecting them in their day-to-day lives. There's almost like this AI numbness. Are those conversations also happening in the C-suite and the boardrooms? Are the large enterprises thinking about how AI is affecting society in that way? It's kind of like this AI brain drain. And also one of the things I want to tack on to that is it seems like in this era of AI slop, we're going to get a lot of kind of AI refining. Like people are going to be able to see past
Mm-hmm.
that and just focus on the high quality applications, the high quality content. So as I'm asking two questions, you can respond to the one that you prefer. But what does that socio-technological aspect to AI from the large enterprises look like?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question that you bring up at large, right? Irrespective of the organizational view or the consumer broad view, which um, is it numbing us as humans, and is it essentially at some level leading us all towards mediocrity, or having us lose our sharpness of the thought process, and the ability to discern, the ability to intellectually think through things, right? Like, are we losing that capacity essentially, right? At one level. And then the other level is, are we being fed with too much of this mediocre generated outcomes and content that is really kind of making us agnostic to it effectively? We already have lost our attention spans, and, most people today find it even difficult to read 2 pages of content. And now what you're saying is, with this emergence of AI, will we even struggle to read a paragraph, right? Like, forget the 2 pages. Like, are we headed there? So I think you make a much broader point there. Now, I'll give you two sort of answers to this question. Organizations certainly are worried about it. And organizations, I think, are ultimately people or constitute of people. So I think a lot of people are also worrying at personal level to see what their jobs would look like a few years out, right? I've heard many software engineers, for example, in some of the best of companies worry and say, hey, will my job even be there 10 years out thanks to vibe coding? I transitioned from being this expert in data structures and algorithms to basically being a person who can manage this vibe coding workflows. And then does that mean 5, 10 years out, I'm not even needed? And then what do I do? Right. And in the process, do I lose all my abilities that I started out with, which is what got me this job in the first place? So there's a lot of that personal level of anxiety, thought process, or surmising that's going on for sure. And similarly, I think from a C-suite standpoint, or from the organizational structural standpoint, there's also a lot of, I would say, curiosity building up around what does the organization of the future look like. Now, some people have jumped that and already gone ahead and claimed, oh, there's going to be AI teammates, and there's going to be a swarm of agents, and there's no dearth of people putting their thesis out there of what a future organization will look like. But the reality is that, um, what is being portrayed as a science fiction driven future and where we are today, there's a very massive gap. And as we have seen with all the technologies, I think where we might end up with and how we might end up, where will we end up with, might be very different from how we are envisioning, this sort of future, right? Where there'll be AI agents, a swarm of AI agents just kind of doing work for us, and be sitting and, I guess, with our margaritas on the beach, right? That's one of the, sort of pictures painted. Um, so I think there's definitely a lot of anxiety there, right? And there's definitely a lot of thought process, active thought process going on. And I think the way I see, especially from enterprises organizational standpoint, I don't think anybody is trying to make that big a jump onto where we might be 10, 15 years out. But they are thinking 1, 2 years out. They're trying to think in terms of, well, how should this scale? Who should they hire? Should they be hiring, new fresh people? How should their associate programs look like? Right? What does training mean? Um, how do they allocate their money's time, energy, so that we can use the technology, but at the same time we can grow the people, because ultimately you still need the people. what are areas where this technology is helping people, and how do they enable that versus areas where it's actually numbing them, right, and making worse outcomes for them. So I think there's a lot of that debate which is going on today actively. I don't believe there's consensus or there is conclusion, but there's definitely a lot of debate and a lot of active introspection going on in that segment. Now, at a broader consumer level, and this is where the second part of my sort of response comes in, is what I'm seeing, and this is a little more philosophical, I would say, in my at least way that I'm thinking, is it's going to impact our society quite substantially. And it will impact our society quite substantially, not in the way we are thinking it will. And what I mean by that is, if you really think about it, in the post World War II era, which is most of the modern history, if you may, that at least everybody alive today has lived through, the oldest of the people, and then, of course, the younger generation is uh, far newer in this world, if you may. It has all been a function of democratization at multiple levels, right? It's been democratization of technology, democratization of access, um, jobs where, instead of having very wide gaps between the factory labor and the factory owner, had transitioned to a lot of a very intellectual, service oriented, middle class jobs where larger part of society was involved in intellectual activity, were active participants, and that has gotten us to where we are today, right? So that's been the story over the last multiple years. And if you look at the last multiple years, this is also the period where probably as a society, despite the good and the bad, we have seen a lot of innovation come through, right? A majority of the things that we use today, whether it's the communication, the ability that you and I are talking right now over the internet without even thinking, twice about it, because this is common for everyone today, has all emerged in the last few years. And this is all the outcome of this democratization, right? It's not one company that built it, it's multiple companies, multiple people, multiple countries, multiple geography situations where innovation has come from, right? Now, the question is, does AI make that more of it, or does it disrupt and break that? And I think that's difficult to answer just today. But if you were to look at how the resources are being allocated, or some of the outcomes that may happen, um, given the initial early sort of signs, if you may, you could see actually fracturing or fragmenting of that. And what I mean by that is, think of it this way: if all the jobs around banking and software development and other kind of services industries like advisory, or just everything else in that world, auditors, lawyers, like so on and so forth, if they get disrupted in a big way, and if much of that now a system becomes capable of delivering, it's not like all of them would get eradicated. We would still need CPAs, and we would still need doctors, and we would still need bankers, but there'll be far fewer of them. And then the question becomes, well, what will we as society do? And when I say we, I mean more in the plural societal sense, right? Like we broadly, especially those who today go to college or build skills, or who basically aspire to the same last multi-generational outcomes of doing intellectually curious activity, and productively contributing and also doing well for themselves, and therefore also kind of reaping the rewards. What's going to happen to them? Will they still be relevant? That's a question to be asked. And if the answer is yes, they'll be relevant, and there'll be new jobs that'll be created, new types of things that we don't know just yet. And that's one school of thought, right? Like if you look at it, the pre-technology era, post-technology era, a lot of newer jobs were created that didn't exist in the pre-technology era. So like in a post-AI era, are there new types of these intellectual jobs and activities that will come in? And that might open up opportunities, and people will, then put their energies into it, then sure, excellent. That would be great. However, um, there could also be a situation and outcome where that may not be a reality. And in fact, what is going to happen is that we might actually dissolve down to the same old, a feudal sort of a reality where few people will become absurdly rich because they'll hold on to the resources. And the machines will be the new slaves for them, if you may. And then everybody else will struggle to meet their ends, meet their ends meet. So I think like this is where the interesting, I feel, philosophical debate that at least pops up at me every time I look at conversations around AI and what it can do. Now, it's not coming anytime soon, as much as anybody would argue. But I do feel like some of these would become more relevant as we start 2026 and in the years afterwards, because this is certainly a segment that would play a part in terms of how society gets shaped. What choices people make based on those.
Speaking of philosophy and AI, 2026 is right around the corner, and after reading AI 2027 a handful of times, I printed it out, and I was going through it, just trying to figure out, is there any merit to this? And it's interesting because it's a really it's a really cool hypothetical, but I don't know if it has legs. And it doesn't seem like something that is going to happen. But it is a really interesting scenario because it forces us to ask questions. Um, One of those questions is, what do we want artificial intelligence to be in our society? And I guess I'll pose that question to you, just as a CEO of an AI company. What is your goal in putting AI out? What do you want AI to be? What should we want AI to do for us?
Yeah, it's a very good question. See, for us, there was clarity around AI being a very effective assist, like a power tool, a booster, that would allow us to do more, allow us to unlock new capability, and allow us to do things faster, and allow us to focus on things that really matter, as opposed to just the mundane that keeps us very busy. Um, so for us, honestly, that was the reason why we exist. That is the reason why we started this company. And I think that has only become more real as we have built the product out, and as our users and customers have given us valuable feedback, right? So that has remained true, and I think that remains true even today, looking out forward, right? So you can think of us as having the same goals that perhaps automobile manufacturers had towards transport. It's like, hey, it takes too long and it's too cumbersome to go from place A to place B. If we innovate with this different kind of transportation technologies, from cars to airplanes, we can get from place A to place B much faster, and therefore enable new outcomes. So I think it's the same kind of a goal, if you may, that we have in terms of AI and the technology that we are building. Um, However, there is an aspect that I do think about lately, which is that every benefit also comes with its own side effects, right? And sometimes the side effects may not be very desirable. And in this case, I think the automation of tasks also means, exactly going back to your earlier point, is it depleting us of some abilities as humans that we cherish today, and that makes us a society and makes us a productive bunch that we are today, right? And if it does, well, how do we go and sort of counter that, or what are the new sort of ways that we can enable it? So that's certainly something that I think about. It's not one of the pieces or outcomes that we would like to see, but it's definitely an outcome that can happen. So that's my goal for AI. Um, and I feel like, I think that's a goal that, broadly speaking, we should all aspire towards, because ultimately, as humans, as builders of society, it's the human aspect that is the front and center of our existence, right? We exist because we as a society, and we as humans value a certain you know outlook towards the world, the life that we live, the society that we exist in, and the things that we value, right, as people. So I think, like, that still should be supported. I mean, that's the end idea, with AI being an enabler. Now, having said that, I think the world isn't necessarily looking at it like that, is how I perceive. I feel like there's also conflict in terms of AI, not only in one way, but in multiple ways, replacing humans, not just supplementing, but replacing humans. And that's an interesting argument on its own. But also the concept of AI really sort of stepping in to do, I would say, even emotional tasks or human centric tasks. So this is not about human centric intellectual activities or task completion, but emotional tasks, right? And this is where you start having AI friends, right? Like, or AI being the source for providing entertainment primarily, or companionship. And that's where I feel I start worrying, honestly. I feel like that's where it starts getting trickier. And that's where I think the deeper we get into it, which I think we will as a society, I don't think there's any going back from it, because we already do to an extent with these creations of ours over the years, from virtual worlds to games which have become more real than real sometimes, to the sort of conceptions of reality that we have created for ourselves, right? But I think like that might get accelerated. So there's certainly some element of that I personally feel I think one needs to deliberately think about and consider as we start looking at what AI would mean, right? I would certainly not want that outcome, but I'm not the one who's deciding how the society wants it, right? So we as a society cumulatively would decide it, and I think that that's something that I do feel that is an important question to think over, about what we would expect and what we would want AI to do or not do for
Well,
us.
we've been talking so much about where AI is going to go, obviously, because of the crux of the podcast. Where do you think humans are going to go with AI in 2026?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's going to be conflict, is how I look at it. There'll be one set of people who would definitely want to do more of AI, because either they are the ones that are building some of those products or taking advantage of it. And, I think I would count myself also as one of those, because, we do enable a lot of this technology. So I think it's exciting. But there'll also be a second set of people who might be left behind a little bit, right? Because either they have not adapted to it, or they're still unsure how to adapt to it, or they don't believe in it, right? And so there's going to be a little bit of a conflict, I would say, of some form that's going to emerge. The conflict, in my opinion, would especially be very pronounced where anybody is getting adversely impacted, right? And which, in other words, really means like, hey, if you're going to lose your job because of AI, if you will have fewer opportunities because of AI, um, or if what you were really good at is kind of stolen from you, because now AI, even if it's not as good as what you do, but has devalued your, that outstanding thing that you do, you will certainly see, conflict there very pronounced, right? In those cases, for obvious reasons. And then the question really becomes for 2026 is, what does society as a whole, and how do some of these people take that on, and what do they do with it, right? So that's basically one side of the story that I see emerging and becoming front and center, right? And I think this would also be relevant for, let's say, young folks like you. I mean, you're a little further along in your career, but let's say those who are just entering the workforce, right? They would certainly be conflicted to see, hey, how much of skill building should they do around some traditional well-paying jobs, if you may. If AI is going to eat that up, should I even care to build that skill? So they're going to be conflicted on those counts, and some may choose to still go down that path, and some may not. Um, and then there's the second part of the equation, which is where the numbing aspect that you spoke about. And there's been studies, by the way, right now, and I believe there's a more recent one that came out of MIT, which says like if you overuse AI, and I think they had a bunch of Chat GPT users, or some samples that they chose, they're even seeing tangible less brain activity. And like even the neurons being fired, or like whatever that's normally supposed to happen if you're supposed to indulge in a conversation or reading or problem solving, or any activity which involves thinking, even that's not happening. Supposedly you're doing thinking tasks, but with ChatGPT by your side. Um,
It's not a
we're also
co-pilot; it is the pilot.
It is the pilot, yeah, exactly. And in some cases, you also see that frustration come up in academia. Where now many teachers, and I speak to a lot of professors, across the country, and I see some of them are getting frustrated with overuse of AI. Where initially it was concern around cheating, and now it's like, well, everyone's using it. So I don't even know why we are even giving these exams or these, submissions, because it's just too much of this AI washing, if you may, really, right? And nobody's understanding any concept. So I think like there is going to be a bit of a conflict on that side too, the overusers, and then ones who will stay away from it.
Is it safe to say that using AI has become an addiction?
It probably is to an extent, right? I mean, I think more than addiction, what I would say is that it's become an easy way to avoid some tasks. So, I think like inherently, if you ask me, um, I think most humans, and I would say society at large, likes to be lazy around things that they don't emotionally associate with, right? So, say things like a simple example of that would be you have to communicate. If you're communicating with a good friend of yours who you enjoy hanging out with and chatting with, then yeah, of course, it's active communication because you're having fun. But if you had to send out some communication as a part of some protocol, right, whether it's a part of work or otherwise, I think 9 out of 10 people usually aren't very motivated to do that because they almost look at it as drudgery, saying, "Oh, I got to finish this task because I got to do it." And so, for anything like that that falls into that sort of a bucket, which is not something they're necessarily enjoying, they're going to inherently now lean on AI. The same set of people probably leaned on, "Hey, let me do some quick Google search and see if I can copy paste something, or let me go ask somebody to do it for me." Right? And I think like now AI has become that quick option to go out there. Um, the part though that I worry about quite a bit is in some of these situations, and especially in your formative years, the incentives actually lead to that addiction. And so what I mean by that is, most people who are, let's say, in school and doing their submissions or completing their work, see it as a necessary task with the end goal of actually achieving the grades or getting their degrees and certificates. So that's basically the path that they kind of look towards, or they're trying to complete. Um, so in that situation, if somehow it still gets you those outcomes, it still helps you achieve the certificates, it helps you get the good grade, then obviously you feel like, hey, why should I make the effort? I still get the outcome that otherwise I was aiming to get, without the pain, without the extra effort I have to make. Because again, your goal is to finish that off and get that end output. So certainly in those cases, it becomes very addictive because the more positive reinforcement occurs, you use it once, you get your outcomes, you go back, you use it again, you get more of those outcomes, and now you're totally dependent on it. So I think, yeah, there's a bit of that for sure.
Well,